Good day, viewers. Before embarking on this narrative, I kindly request that you express your approval by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. I recognize that this may be a simple request, but your support is greatly appreciated. I will now commence. I previously considered my life to be relatively ordinary, encompassing both positive and negative experiences. However, I have come to realize that the majority of my life has been characterized by a multitude of positive occurrences. I entered into a marital union with Joyce, my first wife. I fell in love with a woman 24 years ago. We had two sons, Dylan and Parker, who were enjoying the start of the summer holidays before their senior and sophomore years, respectively, at the same leading university in our state. Before and after this summer, Joyce and I were alone and enjoyed spending time together. Joyce had only two complaints about Dylan and Parker. First, they did not communicate with her and with her husband as much as they should. This is a common complaint among mothers of college-age sons, particularly regarding their personal lives, which they tend to keep more private than other aspects of their lives. Second, they looked and behaved so much like their mother that she posited that some of her DNA may have been passed on to them. Both Dylan and Parker are 190 centimeters tall, weigh between 95 and 100 kilograms, and have sandy hair and blue eyes. I am almost as fit as they are due to my daily cycling, weightlifting, kayaking, and CrossFit regimen. Joyce, 5 years and 8 months ago, weighed 60 kilograms, has almost black hair, and green eyes. However, the boys do not resemble her in any way, either in appearance or in physical characteristics. My primary concern regarding my family is that Joyce frequently travels for business. She is absent from home for an average of 2 to 3 nights per week. In contrast, my occupation is local, and I am able to set my own schedule. Consequently, if she were to be at home more often, we could engage in a greater number of activities together and enjoy life to a greater extent than we currently do. This is particularly true given that financial constraints are not a significant issue for us. If Joyce were to be at home more often, we could engage in more activities together and derive greater enjoyment from life than we currently do. This is particularly true given that financial constraints do not represent a significant obstacle for us. On a Tuesday when Joyce was on one of her business trips and Dylan and Parker were at their summer jobs, I was just concluding a 25-kilometer bicycle ride that was among the most rewarding in our region. There were numerous AE locations along the route, and I parked in D. It was an excellent ride on a beautiful, sunny day with low dew point. I was about to turn into parking lot D when I encountered a female cyclist riding on the side of the road who appeared to have significant issues with her bicycle. I stopped to assist, inquiring as to the nature of the problem. With a somewhat amused expression, she stopped right in front of her bicycle. She was on her knees, examining the rear derailleur, and looked up at me, showing a pleasant face. She gave me a half-smile in response, saying, "Yes, thanks for asking. It seems that the aluminum suspension of my rear derailleur is bent in some way, and the rotation of the rear wheel is difficult, let alone switching." She replied, demonstrating a good knowledge of bicycle mechanics, "Do you mind if I take a look?" I asked, "If you would be so kind." She replied, getting up, and I gave her a quick glance as she stood up and took a couple of steps away. I estimated her height at about 160 centimeters and weight at 45 to 50 kilograms. I couldn't see her hair well because of the bike helmet, but her brown eyes, which were not obscured by sunglasses, were visible and attractive. I examined the rear derailleur and confirmed that her diagnosis was accurate. "You have identified the problem." I stood up and said with a smile, "You have likely determined that even if you succeed in putting the suspension back in place, you will still be unable to do so here on the track. It is not possible to reinstate the suspension on the track. The rear wheel must be removed and the suspension likely requires repair at the bike workshop." This is precisely the issue I had anticipated. She inquired whether I was parked in parking lot D. I confirmed that I was not, but that I was in parking lot E, approximately 6 kilometers away. I was unable to proceed to lot D. She expressed her displeasure, indicating that she was situated in parking lot D, directly adjacent to the bicycle path. I offered to escort her to her vehicle in parking lot E. I sensed a certain fatigue in her demeanor, so I produced my identification and presented it to her. I provided my name and address, advised her to contact a known individual, and informed her that I would provide her with a ride and that she would subsequently contact that individual. As soon as I provide you with a ride, that is, if I am ultimately revealed to be an axe murderer, at least you will die with the knowledge that I will be apprehended. I said, uttering the last sentence with a wide smile on my face. It was only after I said this that I wondered if she would find my joke amusing and if she would decline my offer. "He's quite the cheeky brute, isn't he?" she laughed. Instead of fleeing in response to my jest, she seized my identification card, retrieved her mobile phone, and proceeded to place a call. She positioned herself approximately 2 meters in front of me. "Hello, Cheryl," she said. "It's me, Brenda. I'm experiencing a technical difficulty with my bicycle on the designated pathway. A gentleman named Brian Crack, a resident of this municipality at 727 Sagamore Lane, has offered to provide me with transportation to my vehicle." She then informed me that I should be aware that I might be killed, and she laughed into the phone after a pause. She then listened to Cheryl for a moment and said, "That's a great idea." She then looked at me and said, "Cheryl thinks you should remove your helmet and allow me to take a photograph of you and send it to her so that the police can identify your face. In the event that my identification is found to be invalid, I removed my helmet and posed for a photograph with a smile on my face." A woman named Brenda, who had introduced herself previously, took a photograph using her mobile phone and then proceeded to send it to her earpiece. "Cheryl," she whispered into the phone after approximately 30 seconds. Secondly, she smiled and said, "Thank you," before ending the conversation. "Here, you drive my bike, and I'll take yours to my car," I said, fastening my helmet strap to the handlebars of my bike. I then took her bike and walked on. We conversed briefly on the way to my car. Upon reaching my vehicle, I placed both bikes on the bike rack in the trunk, threw the helmet on the back seat, and opened the passenger door was for her, and she removed her helmet and entered the vehicle. I was compelled to observe her glossy dark hair cascading over her shoulders. What could be more appealing than this woman's appearance? I contemplated this as we drove for 15 minutes to the parking lot. Our route was further down the road than the bike path. We exchanged a considerable amount of personal information. I was remarkably open and loquacious. There was something about the brand that inspired confidence. I proceeded to inform her about my family, including Joyce's numerous trips and my 2 sons, Brendan, who was just as outgoing, and Stan, her husband, who traveled on business almost as often as Joyce. She had 2 daughters, Serena and Kira, who were sophomores and seniors at the same state university. I inquired about your daughters, Diane and Parker, who are presumably studying at the same university. I was curious whether your sons are pursuing engineering as you mentioned. She responded with a chuckle, indicating that Serena is majoring in art with a bachelor's degree in art history, while Kira is studying kinesthesiology with a bachelor's degree in art. I found this amusing, as it suggests that their classes are probably on opposite ends of the campus, with 30,000 other students in between. After a pleasant conversation, we arrived at parking lot E. I then proposed an idea, as I was going to my fitness club for a CrossFit class. "You are not a cyclist, but you will be spending time on a bicycle, so why not leave it at Morton's Bike Shop, which is conveniently located next to my fitness club? Fitness club and you'll be at my disposal. My guest today, have you tried doing CrossFit? Are you trying to pick me up?" She laughed. "No, I'm just trying to figure out if your body is working as well as it seems." I grinned back. "Oops, did I say that out loud?" She chuckled. "You're a real cheeky guy, aren't you?" "I have no further commitments." We proceeded to the bike workshop, where we exercised together for approximately an hour. She demonstrated remarkable proficiency for a novice, and then retrieved her repaired bicycle and proceeded to a conventional cafe for lunch. We subsequently bade each other farewell. We embraced briefly, and she then stated, "If Joyce isn't home tomorrow, why don't you go kayaking with me on the river? If you are not otherwise engaged, perhaps you would care to accompany me on a kayaking excursion on the river. I typically embark on such an excursion on Wednesdays when Stan is otherwise engaged." I replied that I had intended to embark on such an excursion this week. As you may have already observed, my SUV is equipped with a roof rack that can accommodate 2 kayaks. I will pick you up at approximately 8 o'clock. The time is 12 a.m. She stated that she would be prepared and I smiled. I believe you are already aware of the address. In response to her query, I confirmed that I had indeed provided her with my personal information. She then laughed and said that she would have been able to track me down easily if I had not done so. I replied that I would not have trusted her if I had not done so. She then asked me about the conversation she had had with Cheryl, which had prompted her to tell her that I was evil after I had sent her a photo. Brenda blushed slightly but quickly recovered her composure. Brenda was probably the easiest conversationalist I've ever met. Moreover, although she was far from a classic beauty, her body shape, and facial features, as well as her general demeanor, made her as attractive as any other woman I have ever met. When I left, I convinced myself that she had never cheated on Joyce in the 26 years they had been married. Together, including 24 years of marriage, it was unlikely that Brenda would engage in infidelity. I hoped I was correct in this assumption because I had an aversion to individuals who were unfaithful to their partners. Over the subsequent weeks, Brenda and I developed a strong friendship due to our shared interest in physical exercise and outdoor activities. We would practice together at least 3 times a week, for several hours each time. It was a highly enjoyable experience. A friend, however, there was an issue. I was strongly attracted to her. The issue intensified one day when we both turned over on our kayaks and eventually pulled them ashore. Initially, we laughed and teased each other. However, when Brenda stood up, strapping the paddle to the kayak, her face was very close to mine. Given the difference in our height of 30 centimeters, she was positioned as close as possible to me. I was unable to resist the urge to kiss her. I kissed her quickly on the lips. She looked at me questioningly. Subsequently, I embraced her and kissed her deeply. Upon our separation, she gazed at me intently. It is evident that we both abhor infidelity and that we have no desire to inflict harm upon one another's families. History has shown that those who betray their partners are eventually apprehended. I hold you in high regard, but our recent encounter will inevitably result in a sexual encounter, which, in turn, will likely culminate in a catastrophic outcome. We gazed at each other for what seemed like an extended period of time, while I was observing her. In response to her assertion, I ultimately conceded with a smile, "You are correct. I apologize and will refrain from physical contact unless it is to prevent you from drowning." She reciprocated with a brief kiss on the lips and suggested, "Given your noble nature and the impact of our intimate encounter, how about tying my kayak in addition to yours to the roof of my SUV?" I complied, and for the next week, neither of us made any further advances. An incident occurred. Brenda and I swam in a local lake to refresh ourselves after an hour of kayaking. She made some witty remark, and I unbuttoned the elastic band on her one-piece swimsuit just above her buttocks. "Brian, you don't want to flirt with me," she growled mockingly. "It appears that you are unable to control your genitals at all. Is that correct, Brenda? Please release me. I will be good." I groaned. She laughed and released me, turning her back to me. I sat down on the ground. She turned to me and sank to the ground, approximately 1 meter in front of me. "It is difficult for me to maintain a neutral attitude towards you. We need to take action to improve my attitude towards you. I need something to improve my attitude towards you." She moaned in response, but I am unable to provide it. Cease verbal communication with me. We derive great pleasure from engaging in disparate activities together. You are more entertaining than any other individual I have conversed with. I am reluctant to terminate our friendship or our shared academic pursuits. After another interval of silence, she tilted her head. I reflected on the situation for a moment, while she appeared to be contemplating potential outcomes. "I concur with your assessment." I responded, "What are our next steps?" "I intend to host a barbecue at my residence next Saturday. I will include you, Dylan, and Parker on the guest list. There will be at least 30 individuals in attendance, including at least 15 of Serena and Kira's peers. How do you feel about this proposal? I am confident I can make it a success." I smiled and then avoided physical contact. The remainder of the day was spent at Brenda's barbecue, which proved to be a success. There was an opportunity to meet Stan and Joyce, and the other adults were friendly and welcoming. It was notable that there were no individuals who could be considered disagreeable. Joyce and I were introduced to Aina and Kira, and it became evident that Brenda's assessment was accurate, with the exception of the height and weight differences. These individuals appeared to be more closely resembling Brenda than her biological children. There was an opportunity to interact with Serena and Kira, who were at least able to introduce themselves to Dylan and Parker. All the men under the age of 22 appeared to enjoy themselves together, engaging in various games, including volleyball, ping pong, and other activities, in the backyard of Brenda and Stan. The setting seemed ideal for such an event. We were among the last to leave the party, departing around midnight. On our way home, Joyce inquired about the attendees' experiences. The boys, with Cheshire Cat grins, replied that they had enjoyed themselves and were pleased to have attended. However, as anticipated, they remained completely silent about whether they had formed any positive impressions of the dozen or so women between the ages of 17 and 22 who had been present at the party. Brenda and I recalled the party when we went for a bike ride and lunched the following Monday. I inquired of her whether Serena and Kira had been impressed by the attractive young men in attendance. Brian, because I had an overly obsessive mother, I never asked questions of that nature and they did not volunteer information. Stan attempted to inquire about it, but they simply laughed at him. He inquired about it, but they merely laughed at him. We had a pleasant time, father, but we were not engaged, so let us leave it as it is. They informed him that the party had the desired effect. One weekend, I attended a professional baseball game with Stan and two other men, while Brenda went to a play with Joyce and the wives of two other men simultaneously. Over the following 2 weeks, despite the fact that Brenda and I went for walks together on 7 occasions, our interactions were restrained. We had a pleasant time. However, there was no kissing or caressing. Then, a strange coincidence occurred. Joyce and Stan held unusual conferences outside the city on Friday afternoon and Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after Brenda's party. Dylan and Parker left for the weekend on Friday evening to go to the beach, and Serena and Kira left for the weekend on Saturday morning to visit several sorority sisters at the lake house where one of their parents lived. Brenda boasted about her abilities as she was an excellent dancer, and we were confident in our ability to avoid any lascivious contact. Therefore, we agreed to go to dinner and to the club. We did not hide this from Joyce or Stan, but we had to promise them that the 4 of us would go to dinner and the club the following Saturday. The best club for us was Joyce's opinion. When I picked up Brenda early on Saturday evening, she looked as good as ever. However, she was wearing a dress at the barbecue. It was the only on this occasion. She was attired in a modest ensemble, including her hair in a bun, no makeup, and a dress that did not accentuate her toned hips or prominent buttocks. The dress suited her well that evening. She wore just enough light makeup, her hair was well groomed but loose around her shoulders, and she looked radiant. Our dinner was relatively modest, but there was a great deal of laughter, including at least half a dozen obscene jokes that she heard from her friend Cheryl, an unmarried nurse. We attended one club that seemed too boring to us, but the second was enjoyable and well suited to our preferences. Brenda demonstrated proficiency in dancing, exceeding her own expectations. For a man who had never studied dancing, I was able to hold my own on the dance floor. However, I was reluctant to leave Brenda's side, as I did not want her to dance with anyone else. Despite my efforts, I had to dissuade a couple from dancing together. 2 individuals inebriated to a considerable degree and exhibiting a high level of intoxication were observed on that particular evening. Brenda, my companion, had consumed a greater quantity of alcohol than I had previously witnessed. Both of us are partial to tea, but on this occasion, she had consumed approximately 2 glasses of wine and 4 pints, while I had consumed only a couple of beers. During our dancing engagement, which included a slow dance towards the conclusion of the evening, she exhibited a tendency to seek physical proximity. Following our return journey, which commenced at approximately 1 a.m., she expressed a desire to engage in further conversation. At 12 a.m., she exhibited frivolous and chatty behavior, frequently coming into contact with me in a playful but not overtly sexual manner. Upon arriving at her residence, she requested my assistance in replacing 2 screens that she had moved earlier that day. She requested that I not inform Stan of her actions, as it was a source of contention between them. She inquired as to whether I could wait until the following day to complete the task. I declined the invitation the following day, citing the desire to sleep longer and the fact that Stan would be returning after lunch. She then reached under her dress and removed her lace panties, placing them under my shirt. I was uncertain how I would explain the absence of her panties to Joyce. I responded with a joke, suggesting that she tell Joyce that this is what she wanted. It would be advisable to inquire as to her preferences. Brenda observed that I was hesitating, and she inquired as to whether I required assistance. I must admit that I am in need of your help. I will even inform you of what Cheryl said when I emailed her your photograph on the day we met. She giggled. I yielded to her request and accompanied her into her residence. She encountered a minor issue with the key, so I opened the door for her. Upon entering the living room, Brenda's demeanor shifted, her expression becoming somewhat serious. She approached me, embraced me, and kissed me deeply, an act that was arguably the most passionate I had ever experienced. Initially, I was uncertain about the duration of this kiss, but it seemed to last approximately 5 minutes. The passage of time, the atmosphere, and the distance between us were all factors that contributed to this feeling of prolonged intensity. In that moment, nothing else seemed to exist except my overwhelming sense of euphoria. Eventually, I came to myself, almost normally, and found myself tearing her torso from my chest. When she opened her eyes, which she did with great care, I exclaimed, "You are a magnificent being," before planting a kiss on her smiling lips. I then urged her to let me take her to the guest room, muttering, "This has finally allowed us to break away from each other." Brenda emitted a brief, mirthful sound and pushed me back onto the couch. She proceeded to remove my footwear, socks, pants, and boxers, which she then scattered across the living room floor. Thereafter, she took my hand and led me upstairs, while Brenda was engaged in laying out the double bed in the guest room. I proceeded to remove the remainder of my attire and then turned her around, holding her at arm's length. "Your body is like that of Aphrodite," I observed when we had concluded our activities. We subsequently fell asleep in each other's arms and awoke only when the sun appeared in the windows of her guest bedroom, which faced east. We appeared to awaken at approximately the same time and smiled at each other. "You are simply amazing," I murmured and then planted a kiss on her lips, despite the morning. It was undoubtedly the most enjoyable period of my life. She giggled and then bestowed upon me a brief kiss. "I must take a shower and brush my teeth." She grinned, leaping out of bed. "Join me," she said, and I did not hesitate. "I am eager to assist." She giggled, reaching for her toothbrush. We partook of breakfast. She was clad in a short nightgown, and I was attired in only boxers. During our breakfast conversation, we ate light meals. I stated that I had nearly forgotten the previous night's events, during which she had lured me into her lair by promising to tell me what her friend Cheryl had said when she had emailed her a picture of me when we first met. She then asked whether I wanted her to attack me. I responded with a growl, indicating that I did not want her to attack me. Instead, I wanted to have sex with her. She then jumped up from her chair. She emitted a scream and proceeded to flee. She did not exert a significant effort to escape, and I was able to apprehend her with relative ease. There was a discernible quality in her gaze, akin to a feigned entreaty. My recollections of our 2 exceptional encounters the previous night, occurring less than 7 hours apart, had the effect of arousing me for the 3rd time in less than 24 hours, which is a relatively uncommon occurrence since I reached the age of 20. It is evident that some form of retribution is necessary. I emitted a low growl, indicating my intention to exact punishment. "I am fearful that I will require your assistance in this matter." She continued to plead with me, stating that she was unable to resist my presence, regardless of the circumstances. In response, I informed her that I had already prepared to leave, long before Stan was scheduled to return. I also requested that she exit through the rear of the residence and traverse the neighboring property's driveway to avoid any potential observation from the occupants of the residence on the south side. I suggested that she emerge from my front door at 9 o'clock, as this would be the most discreet and convenient time. At 12 a.m., it would be challenging to justify. She responded with a laugh and suggested a bike ride on Tuesday. She would arrive at 9 o'clock on her bicycle. "I suggest we have a snack at my house when we're done," I said with a malicious grin. "Okay, it looks like a plan," she replied with a smile. In the evening, however, I was able to suppress it sufficiently to engage in a pleasant interaction with Joyce. During the act of sexual intercourse, I did not fantasize about Brenda. However, when Joyce fell asleep on my shoulder, I began to think about Brenda. I came to the realization that I needed to end the relationship, but I was unsure if I could muster the self-control to do so. On that Tuesday, a series of regular meetings between Brenda and me began, although the days and circumstances changed over the next few months. What occurred on that Tuesday occurred with some regularity after we finished the 35 kilometers bike ride at my house. I spread 2 sheets on top of the bedspread in the guest room. Still sweaty from our trip, it seemed that our sweat glands produced pheromones that made us even more desirable to each other. After bed, we took a shower together. Brenda changed into a sundress that easily fit. I placed her bicycle in the rear compartment of my vehicle, after which I transported her to her residence, a distance of approximately 3 kilometers. Over the subsequent months, Brenda and I engaged in sexual intercourse at least twice a week, with the frequency reaching 4 times a week on occasion. Each encounter with her was as exhilarating as the first, surpassing any prior experience in my life. We even spent the night together on 3 additional occasions when circumstances permitted. While in this state of bliss, neither of us deluded ourselves into believing that our actions were ordinary or devoid of potential consequences. Both spouses believed that their partner's infidelity was justifiable, driven by a complex interplay of guilt and the libidinal stimulation derived from their extramarital encounters. Despite their efforts to maintain harmonious relationships with their spouses and families, they were acutely aware that their actions could potentially lead to the dissolution of not only their own relationships but also those of their partners. The imminent threat of exposure and the intense emotional bond they shared on Wednesday, when Joyce and Stan were away, further compounded the gravity of their situation. Despite our usual routine, we embarked on one of our classic bike rides. However, on that particular day, Brenda had other commitments, and I had an appointment in the afternoon. Consequently, we diverged from our customary pattern and engaged in sexual intercourse only once, when Brenda departed. For reasons unknown, I promptly removed the bed linens from the guest room and washed them in the laundry before showering. This was done to eliminate any evidence of the recent sexual activity that had taken place in that room while I was in the shower. Joyce entered the bathroom, and I was taken aback to see her. "Hi, honey," I said. She chirped, "Are you glad to see me?" "I'm glad, but I'm surprised," I replied through the shower door. When I used Joyce to insinuate to Brenda that I was aware of her infidelity, I experienced a profound sense of guilt and fear about the potential consequences of our actions. Fortunately, we managed to avoid detection within a relatively short time frame, approximately 5 minutes. However, the accidental removal of bedsheets from the guest room could have resulted in severe repercussions for our respective families. Brenda appeared to be contemplating something for a moment, then she gazed into my eyes and stated that our relationship was the most significant event in her life. However, she expressed similar feelings of guilt and fear as I did. She suggested that if we did not have children and if our spouses were less supportive, our circumstances might have been different. Nevertheless, we have children, and if our children are in college and our spouses are admirable individuals who do not merit our infidelity, we must identify a solution to terminate this situation. I concurred, and then a notion occurred to me. You know, I could provide financial support for a visit to a psychologist, who could assist us in making a decision. In order to avoid Joyce discovering any information, I inquired as to her opinion. Before she could respond, we exchanged intense glances. I then uttered the following exclamation, "Oh, !" I surveyed my surroundings and observed a secluded wooded area approximately 50 meters away from me, with no other individuals in view. I then proceeded to lead her by the hand into the woods. I led her into the woods, removing only the lower part of her clothing, and she bent down and leaned against a tree. I took advantage of the situation as soon as we came to our senses. "Fortunately, before anyone else passed by," she said, "we have a serious problem." I concurred and suggested that we pay for the services of a psychologist. We made an appointment, and I will try to make time work for us. We kissed passionately and returned to our cars without computers, driving away by the evening of the same day. I continued, by begging and naming names, I was able to make an appointment for Friday with Dr. Meg Shen, a well-known, a renowned psychologist and family relations consultant who resides in a neighboring suburb. Was contacted on Thursday morning and informed that she would be compensated an additional fee to see us outside of normal business hours. After she described our problem as rooted in guilt and fear, Dr. Sheen agreed to meet with us 4 times over the next 2 weeks. We were fortunate to receive assistance because we were unable to cease our behavior. We were becoming too bold, necessitating exposure as a means of addressing the issue. By the 3rd session, Dr. Sheen had diagnosed our near-term problem. Although she described it in clinical terms, she also described it from a layperson's point of view. Her explanation was as follows: you two are just addicted to each other. I do not use this term lightly in the media, where one frequently hears about people who say they have an addiction, but in 99% of cases, it is merely an excuse for disorderly behavior. Is there no such thing as clinical addiction? Brenda asked. There are several real clinical. Such cases may be as rare as 1 man in 500,000 or 1 woman in 1,000,000, but they are nevertheless exceptional. Addiction is not limited to one person. While I cannot provide a definitive explanation for this phenomenon, I can attest that the 2 of you represent only the 2nd case in my practice. Today, I will introduce you to the techniques and medications that you can use to begin the process of breaking up a relationship. It is crucial to exercise caution, as this approach is the only one that is likely to be effective for you both. We subsequently acknowledged that Meg Sheen's assertions were indeed accurate. Subsequent to our 4th session with Dr. Sheen, we had acquired a comprehensive understanding of the available therapeutic modalities for depression and had received a homeopathic libido suppressant that we could take for the initial 2 weeks. We then proceeded to block our respective mobile phone numbers and email addresses on each other's phones. We concluded our session with a 2-minute kiss. A brief kiss that touched our souls shortly before Thanksgiving marked the beginning of our cessation of contact. The upcoming holidays, combined with the technique that Meg Sheen provided us with and possibly even homeopathic medicines, although I was uncertain about the latter, provided an opportunity to cope with the situation for the first month. I called Brenda every day, sometimes stopping myself, sometimes actually calling, but because my number was blocked, I was unable to get through. Gradually, I incorporated other experiences into my relationship with Joyce, and made a concerted effort to prioritize her needs, as well as those of Dylan and Parker, by Christmas. I had already initiated the process of eliminating my addiction to Brenda. Whenever Joyce inquired about meeting Brenda and Stan, I circumvented the issue. Meg cautioned us that maintaining personal contact would undoubtedly result in a relapse, which would further complicate the recovery process. Additionally, the positive relationship between Dylan and Parker was beneficial. They were not only thriving academically but also demonstrated resilience in responding to Joyce's inquiries. Based on their demeanor and the information they shared, it was evident that they had formed attachments with other girls. They went on vacation and spring break the following year, and they were consistently cheerful both at home and on the phone. The topic of girlfriends was not discussed. By the time Dylan was ready to graduate from college, I was proud of myself and as happy as I could be, given that I no longer used the goddess Brenda. My relationships with Joyce, Dylan, and Parker were as strong as ever. My life was more exciting than before I met Brenda. Everything in my life seemed to fall into place. I still thought about the brand on a daily basis, but my survival mechanisms improved to such an extent that I rarely experienced agony. I fantasized about using the brand only in 1/10 of the cases when I actually used Joyce. I was a little worried about attending graduation as I assumed that Brenda's daughter Kira would graduate from the same university on the same day. However, since there were more than 8, in the absence of any significant developments, the probability of encountering an individual from a different academic institution remained low. Dylan was scheduled to graduate from secondary education with a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. Based on the information available at the time of the previous discussion with Brenda, approximately 7 months prior, Kira was expected to obtain a bachelor's degree from the School of Arts and Sciences in Kinesthesiology held its graduation ceremony on the other side of the campus, approximately 3 kilometers from where Dylan was receiving his degree. This was despite the fact that a graduation ceremony was scheduled to take place at the football stadium, which was common to all schools, given that there would probably be more than 50 graduates. In excess of 1,000 individuals, comprising teaching staff, family members, and guests, were in attendance. I was under the impression that the probability of observing Brenda Joyce Parker was exceedingly low. We expressed pride in Dylan upon his graduation, and the 4 of us captured numerous photographs. We also participated in the ceremony at the football stadium, and we did not encounter Brenda and Stan. Nevertheless, upon our departure from the stadium, Dylan proceeded to return his cap and robe. I was contemplating the optimal venue for a celebratory repast. Parker interjected, "Mom and Dad, there is something I must divulge to you. Dylan and I have reserved a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Student Union. Would you kindly join us there in an hour?" Joyce and I had numerous inquiries, but Parker's responses were evasive. He finally replied with a "Joyce and I entered the conference room, and we were met with a sincere laugh." 44 minutes later, I was shocked to see Brenda and Stan. When Brenda saw me, her eyes reflected the same fear that I was experiencing. Stan and Joyce were happy to see each other, while Brenda and I avoided physical contact and unsuccessfully tried to behave as usual. We chatted for a while, with Stan and Joyce mostly conversing. As both Brenda and I had a deer, we were rendered speechless, our faces illuminated by the glare of the headlights, until we heard Parker's laughter as he entered the room. I was more taken aback by seeing Parker, our youngest son, walking into the room with Serena, Brenda's youngest daughter, holding hands, than I was by seeing Brenda. They both wore smug smiles on their faces. Brenda and I remained silent while Stan, Joyce, Parker, and Serena engaged in conversation. After numerous attempts at circumlocution, Parker finally responded to Joyce's inquiry regarding the circumstances of his and Serena's initial encounter. He stated that they had met at a barbecue hosted by Brenda and Stan the previous summer and that they had been dating ever since. Parker further elaborated that their first sexual encounter had occurred on the weekend of the aforementioned barbecue, which he had attended with the intention of spending time at the beach. Furthermore, Serena was purportedly en route to a friend's lake house. I was immediately struck by the notion that Parker was exploiting Serena while I was simultaneously exploiting her mother. I swallowed my pride and blushed. Brenda, of course, blushed as well. Then Parker proceeded to elaborate on his plans for the summer, stating that Serena and I would secure employment at the university and that we would. They intend to reside in the same apartment not only during the summer but also for the duration of their college studies. They plan to marry after graduation, or perhaps even before, should they be unable to wait. The passionate and affectionate gazes exchanged between Parker and Serena led me to believe that they might not be able to wait. Brenda could serve as my godmother, I thought to myself. I observed a fearful expression on Brenda's face, yet I was confident that we would exercise caution. I could not say the same for Kira and Dylan. Serena laughed while this joke was forming in my mind and becoming increasingly complex. Dylan and Kira entered the room holding hands after a lengthy conversation. Brenda and I were even more astonished. Joyce posed the same question as Parker, "So how did you two met?" "We felt a mutual attraction at the barbecue where we first met." Kira replied, although it wasn't exactly love at first sight, like Parker and Serena. However, after our first date, we realized that there was something between us. It quickly turned into love and lust. We first got close on the same trip as Parker and Serena. Dylan said with a smile. Despite the incongruity of the circumstances, I was required to smile when I was supposed to be at the beach and Kira was at the lake house. The final piece of news is that Dylan and I are getting married in 2 weeks. We intend to have a simple ceremony with family and friends. We both have jobs in our hometown and an apartment just 3 kilometers from Mom and Dad and just 6 kilometers from you, Joyce and Brian. Kira smiled, looking first at her parents. And then at Joyce and me. "Why the urgency?" Joyce inquired. "I'm 6 weeks pregnant," Kira responded with a laugh as Dylan kissed her cheek and grasped her hand. From my peripheral vision, I observed Brenda faint and Stan immediately assist her. I was momentarily rendered speechless. It was a conundrum. How could I possibly refrain from using the brand when we were relatives and shared a common grandson? It was a dilemma that had been brewing within me for some time. Naturally, I was unable to provide an answer, and I was skeptical that even Dr. Meg Sheen would be able to assist us. Given the apparent biological imperative, if my sons, who resembled me and exhibited similar behaviors, were deeply in love with Brenda's daughters, who resembled her and exhibited similar behaviors, what chance did I have to resist Brenda?